Alex McCarthy, he has been a wonderful friend to Launchpad Job Club for quite a long time. I first met him at Product Camp, which is going to be coming up in February. He is an executive career coach from a company called Navigate Next, is that right? And the title of his presentation is Ace Your Job Interviews. He has worked in product management, software development, marketing, and sales roles in companies ranging from early stage startups to global publicly traded companies. He built successful product management and marketing teams for embedded hardware, enterprise software, and web application solutions. He recently founded Navigate Next, dedicated to helping leaders make smarter transitions faster and navigate to careers where they are passionate and engaged. Let's give a very warm Launchpad welcome to Alex McCarthy.
I hate that bio. It's too long, too detailed. It sounds like somebody else, but it is what it is. So I'm Alex McCarthy. Let's see. I guess one interesting fact that wasn't included in the long bio that I need to cut down is I actually grew up in Jamaica, in the West Indies, and just had a blast down there. The other thing I'll say is I've been in your seat, your situation before multiple times, and I'm here to tell you that 95% of the time you're going to end up someplace way better than where you were before, and in reality transitions probably should have happened before they have, so take courage in that, or encouragement from that. And then what I want to help out today with is how we ace interviews. The other thing I'll say up front is we're going to do a couple of exercises. So please get a piece of paper and a writing instrument. We're not going to need them right away, but we do have two exercises. I'm a big believer in walking out with a little bit more than what you walked in with, and there'll be drafts, but they'll really help you with your interviews. All right. So here's the agenda. The first thing I want to make sure that everybody really understands and gets is this idea of the mindset. I think a lot of people, and I know I've done this, you go into a job interview, they have the job, you need a job, therefore there's a disparity, right? In reality, that's not the way to look at it at all. We'll talk about it more, but really it's two equals, right? They're hiring you to do something, and you need to decide whether you actually want to do that. Was it Mark, you up here a second ago saying you were back?
Yeah.
Yeah. He said, yeah, if they pay me enough. Right? So that's one of the aspects of it. Is the work interesting? Does it suit what you need? Can you be successful? Do they have an idea what success is? So we'll talk about that. The next thing is preparation. Preparation is absolutely key. I hear a lot of people get that first interview but then don't get called back. And a lot of the times that is because the preparation and your kind of first shot at making an impression isn't always the best. And so we'll talk about how you prepare. Then we're going to do behavioral questions. We'll do an example of that. Then we'll do estimation questions. We'll do an example of that. Then there's a couple of common questions. And then I'm happy to answer any questions you guys may have at the end. So as we're going through this, if you have, well, I'll answer questions at any time. Don't wait till the end. But if you have additional questions at the end, then I'm happy to spend some time answering any questions you may have. All right, mindset. How many people have hired a grocery store? Okay. How many people have shopped at a grocery store? How many people have not shopped at a grocery store? Shirley, really? Oh, online. Okay. Whenever you shop at a grocery store, you're hiring that grocery store. And you're hiring that grocery store to solve a problem. What problem is that grocery store solving for you?
Need food.
Sorry. What? And what needs specifically?
Food.
Food. What's it? Sorry, one second. Survival, right, food. Hunger, exactly. So why don't we can just go out and buy stuff directly from wholesalers and keep it in our house, right? Not really. I can't keep the quantity of stuff that a grocery store has for me. I can't have the selection that a grocery store has for me. I can't get the discounts that a grocery store has for me. That's why we hire a grocery store. Does that make sense? We're hiring them to solve a problem. So, when I walk into the grocery store, I view myself as a business. And I'm in the business of solving hunger, getting food, and I am counting on the grocery store, H-E-B, Walmart, online, we do online now as well, to solve my problem of hunger, right? So we're kind of these two equal things. I'm going to give them money in exchange for their solving my problem. And that's exactly the way job interviews should look like, right? They have posted, if you're doing the job description online thing, which we'll talk about a little bit maybe, then they've posted that they have a problem they need solved, and you're walking in saying, hey, I can solve this problem for you. Okay, so that's the thing. And it really has to be a win-win, with one exception. And this is where, like I said, I've been in your seats. You know, any port in a storm. So if you're out of runway and you're not able to go to the grocery store and the rent's past due, then maybe taking something that's not the best fit would make a lot of sense, just to give yourself some more time. You have to act with integrity to make sure that it is a win-win for both people. But unless you're there, keep your standards high. All right. So the point of interview is to build trust and comfort. And once again, it's both ways. They want to make sure, I've hired a lot of people, and the number one thing I look for is that person a culture fit. Before I worry about anything else, and part of culture fit typically is that person trustworthy. All right, so if I ask a question, am I getting clear answers, or am I getting a lot of evasive answers? Is the person answering confidently, right? That builds trust. If I ask them examples about something they claim to know, they actually know it, that builds trust. And then the next thing is comfort, right? Is that, does this person seem comfortable in their own skin? Are they comfortable in answering questions, even hard questions? And so those are the two things that we're looking for. So let's talk about building trust. How many people can tell when they're being BS'd? Yeah, guess what? The person on the other side of the desk, if you're having a desk, they can tell if they're being BS'd, right? So we don't want to BS people. We want to be authentic and always answer with integrity. Now, answer with integrity doesn't mean warts and all, right? It doesn't mean you give a very long-winded answer, but you don't want to hide anything either, right? It's not, you don't want to deceive people. And the final thing is we want to demo skills, and that's what we'll do here in the two exercises. We'll show them that we know what we're talking about. All right. Intelligence, is, at least with me, is somewhat questionable sometimes, but I guess I can fake it. The tone of voice is really important, especially when you get asked tough questions. You don't want to sound defensive, even though you might be a little bit scared. That's okay. And then this idea of confident. I was in an interview process, and with another candidate, we were both in the competing for a sales job, and we happened to be kind of like a panel, right, where we were both in the same room at the same time. And they asked the other person, what do you still need to learn? And he said, oh, I know it all, you know, I got it, I know it all, been here, done this. And one of the panel members answered, how about humility? Which is not a good sign when you're in an interview. So we don't want to be overconfident, right? Humility is a big part of this thing. So when we're preparing, we mentioned prep, prepare. Know the company. At a minimum, visit the website, right? Everyone in the room here, so I'm assuming, is hungry for the next gig. If you're not hungry, then get hungry, because that's what it's going to take to find something that you're excited about. Once again, personal experience. One of the questions I would ask early in the interview is, so what do we do? What does our company do? And the amount of times I've gotten a blank stare, deers in the headlights, is really, really a shame, because they're probably really good candidates, but I'm hiring somebody to solve a problem. And right now their problem is to find a job, and if they're not willing to go to the extra effort of at least visiting our website and coming up with some idea of what we're doing, then it's not going to be a good fit, because I'm going to see that on their job. All right. We want to understand where their role fits in. So if we're going for you mentioned some account managers earlier in terms of companies that are looking for account managers. At a high level, we have an understanding of what an account manager does, right? They bring revenue in the door, they engage customers to understand what their problems are, make the sales, follow up, make sure the customer's successful. So that's kind of the explicit. The implicit part is, what are they doing with their sales team? Right? Is this a whole new channel they're developing? Are they moving into a new region? Are they expanding their inside sales because they've had success? All right, so understanding where the role fits in is super, super important. A, to make sure it's going to be a good fit for you, and B, to make sure that you can execute and be successful. Okay, so if you've been really good at, say, inside sales and there's an outside sales job, once again, you need to understand the difference between those two and if you can be successful. How many people have a short pitch about you incorporated? You do? You want to share it? You don't have to. I don't want to put you on the spot, but at least she does. Anybody else have a short pitch about you? Okay. Do you mind sharing, Darren, your...
You kill me. I'm Darren Jones. I'm in business operations. I focus on project management, purchasing, and supply chain improvement. I like to say I squeeze P&Ls and money falls out.
Fantastic. Very, very, very well done. So if you think about what he did is he had a very clear statement of his name. He stated what his experience is. And I love the way he stated basically what his value add is, right? What makes him unique, right? I squeeze the P&L and money falls out. And if you think about business operations, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. So I encourage all of you to send Darren a Christmas card, to come up, ask Darren how he did, because it was really very, very well done.
He has a longer version if I feel it's better.
Right, which is great, but start with the short one, and then if they have questions, then you can go to your longer one. So a SOAR, how many people have heard of SOAR? Sometimes a STAR. All right, we have some experts in the room. So when it comes to that slide, I'll expect somebody to stand up and present for me because I have no idea what that means. And then we want to develop a set of questions that we want to ask them. Once again, you're going to have questions hopefully anyway, and you definitely want to make sure when somebody says, hey, do you have any questions, that you actually have some questions so you can ask them. And we'll talk about asking some questions early in the presentation, and then practice. This is where your confidence comes in. This is where you're not going to get curveballs because you've practiced before. So that's the practice part. The first one we've talked about. The second bullet is the real problem typically is not in the job description. How many people have written job descriptions trying to hire people? Okay? And how many times, for those people who raise their hands, has the job description attracted the right set of people for you? Okay, how many times has it not happened? Right. Okay, so one here. Okay, two, right? So this is the inverse of this is as a candidate or job prospect is job descriptions don't always tell you exactly what they're looking for. There's two things that happen with job descriptions. One is they're basically looking for somebody who can do everything they need because it's easy to write that job description. And number two is, and I'm certainly guilty of this, I won't speak for anybody else who raised their hands, I take the job description from the last role, I copy it, I add a couple of tweaks, and I put it out there. Right? Even though the needs for the job may be very, very, very different. But it's just time pressure. And so if you see something and you go, oh, they're asking for these three things and I don't have them, try and network to get in front of them anyway. There's a stat that ladies are less likely to apply for jobs where they don't feel as qualified. Ladies, I'm telling you right now, don't let that come to you, right? Go ahead and apply for the job because once again, you don't know exactly what they're looking for. And this, you want to let them say no, you don't want to say no to yourself. All right, so as long as you think you have a good shot at it, totally apply, get in front of them, and just wow them with who you are. All right. Questions. Oh, so we're going to have some questions, which are basically a hypothesis that we have to be tested, that we need to test. So I'm going to say, okay, there's this outside sales role. On I'm going to make a hypothesis that they're expanding into a new territory. So I want to ask a question around that to test that hypothesis to see whether it's accurate or not. Okay? So that's a very simple example. And this is the next big tip. If you have a couple of takeaways, hopefully this is one of them. And that is, you want to ask some questions early. Because, as I said, they have a problem that's going to be solved. It's not always in the job description. And so you want to ask them and understand early what the real problem is. Because you may answer a set of questions that are great for the job description, but not for the real problem they're trying to solve. So when you're early in the conversation, when you're early in the conversation, that's when you want to ask some questions. And the way you want to ask the question, if you can ask the questions, is say, hey, listen, I really want to answer the questions that you have as best as possible with the most relevant experience. So would you mind, please, what are the challenges? What does the success in this job look like in a year? Okay, well, great. Based on that, I'll answer the questions these ways versus that way. So you're helping them and you're helping yourself. Yes, sir?
Actually, you answered my question.
I did? Damn, good. Yes, ma'am.
I feel that applies to companies that use like phone screeners who don't have all of that information.
Great. So the question is, how does that apply to companies that use phone screeners? So the typical phone screen is your resume is kind of past muster, but it's not really good enough to talk to somebody in the department itself. That's where phone screeners typically fall in. And basically what a phone screener, the purpose of a phone screener is, one, to make sure that you can at least present yourself, that you can communicate clearly. Two, that there's no major red flags in terms of how you would fit working at the company. And three is to find out what you made. Right? Those are the three basic things that a phone screener is looking for. Because if you've made too much, they don't want to spend any more time with you because they can't afford to pay you what you made before. If you made too little, then, well, maybe you're not as experienced as we thought you were. And if you're in that range, then great, we'll pass you through to the next person. Does that answer your question? You still want to practice, you want to be prepared for those questions, but you also want to practice, your pitch. You want to make sure that you understand about the company. You may want to understand what you think about the jobs. And then you can still ask them questions, right? What do you know about the role? Has it been open? Is this a new role or is it a backfill? Right? No, you can ask them these types of questions. What's the pay range? They probably won't answer it, ask it anyway. And so you can at least get some information coming out of the phone screeners. Fantastic question, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Is it appropriate during the phone screener to ask regarding the pay range? Because I've been told just to wait a little bit longer.
No, I think you can ask that.
Okay.
I think you can totally ask that. Once again, if you're expecting to make 70K and they ask you, so what's your last range? Well, whatever you say, okay. By the way, I would never say exactly what it is. My typical answer for that is, hey, listen, the company asked that I keep things confidential. So just like if I was working for your company and you asked me to keep your salary information confidential, I would certainly do that. So let me give you an example, and here's a range, right? So it's from X to Y. And then you get to ask them, so now that I've said that, how does that fit with what your pay range is? Are we in sync? Are we out of alignment? What does that look like? And because, and this is where it's a two business thing, right? This is where the mindset has to be, because they say, oh, no, that's 20K over what we were looking for. And you can say, okay, well, is there flexibility? No, there's not really. Okay, well, listen, thank you very much. Really, really appreciate it. If anything changes, let me know, and you go on to the next one, right? Because it's your time and their time. If they say, yes, that was in range, great. Then at least you have an idea that you're in the right ballpark. Fantastic questions. All right. Sorry, this is a long list, so I'll let you read it. This is how an interview should work. So when you're going into an interview, once again, if the mindset is, well, they're in control and I'm not in control and they're going to ask all the questions and I get to ask some questions at the end if there's time, then that's not the right mindset. There really has to be this exchange of information. And the more information you can get earlier, the better it is for you to make a decision of whether it's worth it to continue to pursue shopping at this grocery store, or should I find a different grocery store to go shop at because it's not going to be a good fit. Ask them about their challenges. Try and find out what their real problem is, right? And you can use the questions I had a second ago. We'll talk about SOAR. Ask them some of your questions. You know, just once again, whenever I'm hiring somebody and I say, hey, do you have any questions? You know, where's the company going next year? What's the growth rate look like? You know, who's your competition? You know, whatever it might be, but have some questions so that you can ask them, because then they'll know at least you did some homework, right? Or you care about what their role is. And then always end up with what are the next steps. And so when you're talking to the HR people, you should ask them that. When you're talking to the hiring manager, you should ask them that. So what are the next steps? When would it happen? Who will I hear from? Blah, blah, blah. All right, behavioral questions. Unlike the stock market, with people, past behavior is very indicative of future behavior. Okay? So, if you've been constantly late to meetings for the last decade, then it's very likely when I join this new job, I will continue to be late for meetings, right? That's part of my human nature. So, we need to be prepared to get asked behavioral questions. And the behavioral question basically says, hey, can you describe a time when you've had a technical problem and how you solved it? All right, so it's typically this starts with, can you describe a time, or can you give me an example of? That's your indicator that they're asking a behavioral question. And what they're looking for in behavioral questions is how did you behave? Right? Did you actually jump in and take charge of the situation? Or did you wait for someone to come in and tell you the 10 steps to solve the problem and have to check in every step along the way? Right. A is a better answer than B, in case anybody was actually wondering. So now, what we want to do with this is we want to tell a story. So think about, you know, how many people have been to any kind of storytelling training or just naturally good storytellers? So Mike has. Kathy has. Come on, Kathy, come up here and tell us about your story. No. If you did it to Darren, man, you know, all's fair. They did. Everyone raised their hand. I'm picking on you. Tell us how you learned about storytelling.
I think I've been a storyteller ever since I was a little girl. And I tend to tell too many stories. I am over-story. Every time somebody says something, a story kind of appears in my brain, and I say, oh, well, I know a story about that. And so lots of times it's like, oh, I have a good illustration. I have a good story about that. Would you like to hear it? And they're like, oh, please.
So what makes a good story? What are some of the pieces of a good story?
A good story creates a picture in the mind of the listener. It is interesting or compelling or dramatic or something where there's a surprise or it's illuminating, so it has to serve a purpose. It has to evoke a response that makes them want to hear the rest of it, want to keep, clicking on more. Next page, next page. And then very often it's nice if it has, it kind of gets wrapped up with a ribbon at the end of it. So then finally there's a resolution, or finally there's a happy ending.
So thank you so much. Round of applause. Well done. So the reasons telling a story are so important, and all the points that Kathy made are great parts of the story, is because we're geared to remember stories. As humans, we are geared to remember stories. And if you think about, the Bible, just as a book, let's say, the first part of the Old Testament, that was all handed down as stories, especially the book of Proverbs. They were all stories. And if you read them, you'll see there's a certain cadence, and they tell these little vignettes. And that's why, because they could be handed down verbally, right, from generation to generation to generation. Kathy told me a story probably about a year and a half ago, which I still remember to this day, because she told a story in the way she told the story. And it was about your trip on the Appalachian Trail. Remember?
No.
Yeah, okay. So she went on this, she'd been planning this for a long time, her and her husband, and they went, and I said, how did it go? And she told me the story. And basically the story is they were going, they ran into problems, their footwear started getting blisters, they were sleeping outside somewhere and maybe got into like poison ivy or something, but then she wrapped it up saying, hey, but overall it was great, and we had a good time and lots of great memories, right, from that trip. So, and that stuck with me. When did you go on the trip? A couple years ago?
April 2017.
Yeah, a couple years ago. 2.5 years ago. So very good, right? So there, 2.5 years later, I still remember the story because she painted this very vivid picture in my brain. Obviously, I care very much about Kathy on top of that, but still, this story is stuck. So people are geared to stories. Highlight what you did. Once again, I'm hiring you to solve a problem of mine, and so I want to know what you did. I don't want to know what the team did. I don't want to know what your cube mate 3 cubes down did. I want to know what did you do. And so a lot of us, are raised where we don't like to talk about ourselves. Well, this is the one time where not only are you given permission to talk about yourself, hopefully you're not schizophrenic, but you need to, right? And this is where practice comes in. I did this, then I did this, then I did this, and then the team helped me with this, right? But it has to be about I and what you did. All right, next. So here's what SOAR stands for. Situation, what's your obstacle, what actions did you take, and what was the result? And when you're talking about the situation, you want to say what the goal was. Okay, so now you think about what Kathy said in terms of a story. This is the story. Hey, we went on this trip in the Appalachian Trails. We were going to have this great time. We wanted to get the whole thing done within some number of weeks or months. And the challenge is that we found out where the gear we had wasn't that great. It was really hurting our feet. So what we did was we tried some other shoes. The net result was that didn't solve the problem. So we called it a day with a bunch of great memories. Okay? Or we got a new pair of shoes because you want to have a positive result. We got a new pair of shoes and we could go for another week. Does that make sense, everybody? Right, it's a good story? All right, plus she's got lots of great memories. So I'm going to give you an example. This is a real example from earlier in my career. I was working at a company, and there was this situation we had identified this great opportunity in the optoelectronics market, which is basically fiber optics. And back in the 2000 timeframe, this was a really big deal. They were building out the internet. But we didn't really know about the market. We didn't know who the players were. We didn't know about pricing. And then because of that, there wasn't a lot of consensus internally in the company about if we should even pursue this market, never mind how much should we invest. So that's the situation and the obstacle. So what did I do? Well, I went out and spoke to a whole bunch of our channel partners and a whole bunch of customers and did some research, third-party research that I gathered. And then I could paint this picture about, hey, here's what our customer said. It's very compelling when you give what your customer said. And then I said, hey, here's what our channel partner said. They can build these things, but here's what they're looking for. They're missing this one little piece. And if we do that, then we can go ahead and we can sell this thing. And I've got 2 sales guys that say they'd be happy to sell it because their customers are the customers that we're looking for. And then the result was we sold $20 million of product within 3 months. Okay? Because there was that much pent-up demand for what we had. We found what was unique. So that's the SOAR example. Now I can use that with, hey, can you give me an opportunity where you discovered a new market? Hey, can you give me an example of when you went out and spoke to customers? Can you give me an example where you took leadership? Can you give me an example where you had to convince people internally to invest in a project or something that you had in mind? So the idea there is you don't need 20, 30 SOARs, you need about 10 really, really good ones. And then you want to practice them, so as soon as somebody asks you a question, you can say, I'm going to pull out number 3, I'm going to pull out number 7. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I kind of do. I really like what you did there because it's pretty general. But how specific do you need to be when you're in front of a panel and you don't really know I mean, I could use this for every single interview I have, which is what you just posted, but it's not precise in what their product is. So at what point do you relate? You know,
So
because, I mean,
part of
you
it-
are
yeah. So-
interviewing with specific.
So the question is, so this is great, but what if they ask you about their product? How can you make this more specific to?
Or even what you've done,
Well, this is what I've done.
but it doesn't tell me what you sold.
Oh, because
Correct.
so I see what you're saying now.
Okay.
So if I was interviewing with an optoelectronics company, I would go into a lot more detail, right? I would start with this at a high level, and then I would ask, would you like to get some more details? And then they go, absolutely. Okay, well, I would talk about fiber Bragg gratings and how we could do this alignment, and that's a really big challenge, but we could do it faster than anybody else, and here's why. And then I'd go into a lot more detail. They would say, yeah, no, we're actually getting out of that. We're going to go to something else. Okay, well, I don't want to waste their time. Right? So you have to have that level of detail. But once again, when you build on this, then you can add that in very easily afterwards. Right? And it's kind of like what Darren said earlier. You've got the short version and then the longer version. And if you have these 4 points in your head, and you pull out number 3, and they ask you follow-on questions to number 3, well, because it's your story, you'll have the details underneath that to lay it out and be more specific. Okay? Okay, if they ask, well, how would you apply that to my specific products, which was maybe the second part of your question, well, that depends on how much research you've done on their products. No, go ahead. I'm here for you.
Well, so I'm in the pharmaceutical industry. So
Okay.
when I do an interview with a pharmaceutical company, it's not necessarily the same arena. It's in the hospital, but it's not in the same arena. So I found that when I do the situation, the SOAR part, I get in detail because I'm not sure what they know about what I was doing versus what they understand or their product. It doesn't really.
Got
I
it.
guess I could do it flip way and just try to compare it to what their product is. So it kind of answered the question.
Yeah, no, I would, so once again, her clarification is she's in pharma, specifically in hospitals, but not necessarily like the same department.
Same product or same department or same.
Right, so you're going like, say, from ER to NIC or from diagnostics to,
Now you got it. So it's in the OR. So I deal with surgeons, but I also dealt with anesthesiologists. But then when you're sitting in front of somebody that has a product and is launching a company, they look at you with like 4 eyes. So I don't know in how much detail I need
Got
to
it.
get in.
okay. So this is where you have to know your audience, and that's where you would, you'd probably add a little bit more to the situation. How many people here know about optoelectronics? Exactly. How many people, okay, my friend in the back, okay, 2, 3. Okay, I see a 4, going 4. Sold to the person 4. So if I was interviewing with those folks, those three folks, you know, hopefully I'd have some sense of what their background was, and then I would spend more time teeing things up a little bit in front, and I would talk about, okay, it was this part of the market, and these were the types of products we had, and these were the types of company we were dealing with. But if they don't, then it's good enough to know, okay, I was in this optoelectronics at a high level. They'll go, I don't really know what that is, but, you know, he's telling a story about how he's behaved. I don't really care so much about the actual.
Yeah, I was trying to get that. If it's a behavioral question, so the answer is about behavior, not, and technical detail is only important in certain situations.
Right.
The behavior is the answer.
Right, and so you want to make sure, that's why you want to tell the story short, because they may want to go product, they may want to go follow-on behavior, they may want to go on what happened next. So short version, and then you can expand. There was one question over here. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say to follow up, I mean, it's not necessarily about the specific product, it's about the successes. And you're trying to sell them on your successes, because if you can sell them on your successes, then you should be able to deliver on any product.
Yep, exactly right. So now's when you need your pencil and paper. So think about a job that you are interested in getting hired to do. And then think about what's a frequent job requirement. Okay, does everybody have those two things? Because we want this to be real and useful, right? This is not an exercise, academic exercise. I'm not into that. I want you guys to walk out being this much closer to finding your next gig, all right? So think about those two things. And then what I'd like you to do is come up with your versions of this for that job and that job requirement. What's a story that you could tell that would relate to that person? So, if you don't mind me asking, sir, what type of job are you looking for?
Product management and software.
Sweet. So, product management and software, you should really go to the mega thing if you're not already signed up. I can tell you about that. Product management and software. So you look at product management job descriptions, and for software, there's going to be a certain set of questions you're going to ask. So if you have experience in that, then you just want to say, okay, here's the situation. We were going to launch a new product. We had a major delay. The obstacle was convincing, senior management or engineering to cut the feature set but continue to hit the date. What I did was I went out and did these 3 things, and the result was we compromised and came up with, not all the features being cut, and we were a month later, but it was a win for everybody involved. Right, so that would be a great thing about. Can you give me an example of where you negotiated with development? Sure, here's blah, blah, whatever. You can tell this story. Okay? All right. Yes, sir.
So should we be targeting like a hypothetical for the answer of the SOAR, or should we try and see about coming up and relating close?
Close. Right? So once again, just think about, I'm going to go for product management software. What job are you going for?
Game development.
Game development. What's a typical thing that people who are hiring game developers expect?
5 years of experience.
Okay, what else?
2 to 3 ship titles.
2 to 3?
Ship titles.
Great. So one of the things you may want to come up with if you're anticipating, hey, can you give me an example of when you've executed a ship type? Okay, well that's what this is for. Right? Oh yeah, sure, here's the situation, we needed to get these things out really fast. The obstacle was we didn't have the horsepower in our servers to handle all the rendering, blah, 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 whatever. So what I did is I went to AWS and I set up a server farm and I could do these things in parallel, and the result was we were able to hit our date. Right? I'm kind of making up some going, right? But okay, does that give you an idea of kind of what that would look like?
Yeah, I guess just some of the problem is basically the idea here is, you were saying earlier, a lot of times the job requirements aren't really what they're expecting. So if you're trying to answer those, it's not going to connect with them.
Okay, why don't you come up here, we'll do this real quick, and then I'll get to your, Aaron, what's your question?
I just wanted to see the next slide.
Oh, okay. All right, I'll be right back. Hi, I'm Alex.
Hi, Ben.
Ben, pleasure to meet you. Have you held this role before?
Yes.
You have. What problem would you say they hired you to solve?
Connection. So previously, for example, what I worked is I created a application which was based around educating individuals in China on simple math, for instance.
Okay. So the problem, that's what you did. What was the problem they were trying to solve? Something about people in China not understanding the math that they needed to be successful,
More so, they struggle a lot with kind of studying and being able. So much of it is all about working and researching for their classes. They're trying to do it in a more engaging way. It's not just book learning.
Got it. So then the problem was to make the learning more engaging for Chinese on the subject of math. Okay. So that's the problem you were hired to do. So if I was hiring you to do something similar in another company, I could say to you, hey, can you give me an example where you helped, foreign people accelerate their learning? And you could just basically say what you just said.
Okay.
If I could say, hey, can you give me an example where you developed a program, to fill a gap that was needed? Sure, you could say what you just said, right? Can you give me an example of when you were assigned an important project that wasn't well defined? Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but let's just say for a second that it was, and you could say, sure, let me tell you this example, right? See, do you understand now? So the job requirement, the reason I say job requirement is just to get you thinking about what the idea of the problem you're going to solve is. So maybe the wording on job requirement isn't the best thing, because you're right, 3 to 5 years is a job requirement, but it's not really what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Why are they hiring you?
Right, well, typically, the problem they're having to solve, what they say is, we have a seat that needs filled by a developer, right? Like, so, a lot of times, there's not anything specific that you're working on, you're working in generalities.
Okay, so a seat for a developer. So I would ask questions if I were hiring you for that. I would say, okay, great, how do you work on a team? How do you work under pressure? How do you work with ambiguity? How do you work with product managers? How do you work with quality people? How do you work with the release folks? So I'm not asking, those are behavioral questions. I'm not asking for, have you coded in this or coded in that, or how much you actually get done? What's the quality? Because the team is the most important thing in development. And if you're not a good team player, then even you could be an ace. So unless I have a project of one that requires one developer off to the side, it may not be a good win for you, right? But if you can demonstrate, oh yeah, here's an example of how I went out and worked with so-and-so. Here's an example where I went out and talked to customers because I really want to understand the customer problems. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
You-
I'd love to see that in an actual interview setting, that they actually ask questions about how you integrate rather than what your performance is.
Right, well, they're probably going to ask both because both matter, right? So the final thing I'll say is, even if they don't ask you a behavioral question, you want to answer with the behavioral question. Right? So they may not say, give me an example of X or Y, but you want to tell these little stories because they'll remember you. Oh, he was the guy who did this math learning thing for the China folks to make it more engaging. I'll remember that when it comes down to I've got 6 candidates, which one stood out. Man, this guy said this, and this guy had these great stories, and so.
So, less so answer the questions that they ask, instead give them an answer they want to hear.
No. Answer, you want to use, it's like having the same story and you're just using it to answer different questions. And you always want to ask, did I answer your question? You always want to ask that, because if you didn't, then at least you get another shot at it, right? But yeah, don't guess what they want. Just ask them, tell them the story, because it'll be less than, if you tell a good story like this, it's less than a minute, right? This is not a War and Peace. And then you ask them, hey, did I answer the question? They can say yes or no. And ask the question in a different way or something. Is that helpful? Awesome. Oh, you want to see the previous slide? Thanks, Naz. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to speak up on behalf of the folks here who aren't necessarily looking for work in business and sales. I get that a lot of what you're saying is going to be transferable to those of us who might be looking for work at government agencies, where the profit margin and selling stuff doesn't really enter into it at all. Just a brief background, I'm going for a librarian job at the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. City of Austin is also hiring librarians, and I'm wondering how much would you have to change what you're telling us to sort of address those of us who are going for government sector jobs?
Okay, so I have a good friend who works at TECQ, so we should talk afterwards. Power of networking, folks. What's that? Yeah, and so there's still going to be challenges, right? At the end of the day, the government, TCQ, as a librarian, is hiring you to solve a problem, right? And what they want to know is, what's your past behavior to help solve this problem? So it completely applies. Now, the stories you tell and the results that you talk about, the results may not be, 3 months and $20 million. It may be, hey, I updated the catalog using the Dewey Decimal System at this other place, and it took me 3 months, and there was 40,000 books or whatever. Oh, really? How'd you do that? Right? So that's the same thing applies. It's just the stories are going to be a little bit different, but the results should matter, right? The results should definitely tie back to what I'm being hired to do. Yes, ma'am. And
Any job where you're dealing with the public, there are always questions about a time when you had an angry customer, or you had a conflict with a coworker, or you had a situation that called for protected diplomacy. How did you solve that? So it's people questions.
Yep. Okay. Let's do the exercise. So let's just take 5 minutes, write down what your situation, the obstacle, what you specifically did, and what the result was. And then we're a little bit behind, and I want to get to the, actually, we'll do this. So take 5 minutes, do this, and then instead of pairing up and doing 10 minutes, I'm just going to ask for a volunteer to come up, and we'll walk through their SOAR, okay? So 5 minutes. Okay, there's, come on up. There's, in my world, there's volunteers and voluntold. So in this case, we got a volunteer, so nobody had to be voluntold. Why don't you grab the mic?
Hi, everybody. It's not on.
He volunteered.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Poppy, and I do software. And so this is going to annoy some people because it's a technical one, but life goes on.
So what question do you want me to ask?
So,
can you give me an example of?
Give me an example of.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Give me an example of creating a new library or file.
Okay. Can you give me an example of when you created a new library?
Right. So I used to work on optical spectrum analyzers, and we had the previous product had a really rigid mathematical engine, had a fixed finite set of mathematical expressions you could do on the trace that was measured. I feel like I'm eating the microphone, but
you need to.
Right. So anyway, I just got out of graduate school, and I saw the problem was that this was very limiting on the functionality that you could use the instrument. And so I just learned Lexiniac, which are parsing and tokenizing tools for mathematical expression. So I used those and built a mathematical engine to parse any expression that you could write and build the components needed to do the computation and on the instrument, and this enabled five additional applications to be sold on the product.
All right. So I asked the question, he came back with a really good set of answers. One quick tip, I wouldn't mention out of graduate school. Okay. Just because that puts a time frame on something, and really what your that experience doesn't matter whether you had it earlier in your career or yesterday, right? So that was really very, very helpful.
Always mention what?
Oh, I said don't mention that he did it right after graduate school. All right. So the reality of it is, you know, many of us in the room have gray hairs. There is age discrimination, and so that's why I was saying, you know, because then I'm going to go, okay, well that was a long time ago. What does he know now? So by not saying graduate school, then they don't know whether it was yesterday or 5 years ago graduate school, 2 years ago graduate school. So just be careful about that, you know, with the when you have gray hairs walking into an interview. All right. Estimation questions. So the reason people ask estimation questions is they want to see how you think. Are you logical? Are you making reasonable assumptions? What data are you starting with data, or are you just kind of pulling stuff out of thin air? And it also helps you know, interviewers know how you deal with ambiguity, right? Because you're not going to have all the data at your fingertips, right? So they're just looking for it logically, dealing with ambiguity. Bill Gates was famous for asking interviewees, why are manholes round? Okay? That one's easy. Then he would say, that's easy, right? Because they won't fall in. Then he would say, how many manhole covers are there in Seattle, Washington?
One for every manhole.
What's that?
One for every manhole.
One for every manhole. Great. So then how many manholes are there? So the point is, and by the way, that would actually tell him a lot. And I would You know, somebody like that who could have a sense of humor, but you still need to answer the question. So you would just start guessing, right? You'd say, okay, well, you know, okay, I'm going to guess the square miles, or I'll guess the, you know, number of miles of roads in Seattle are 30,000 miles. I have no idea if it's right or not, but I'm just putting out a data point there. I'm going to say, you know, we'll talk about all manholes that are bigger than 10 inches, because I want to exclude the little itty bitty ones, right? So 10 inches or larger, and I'm going to say, okay, well, there's one every, you know, half a mile. So therefore, I'd say there's roughly 60,000 of them. Okay, now, does it matter whether it's 60,000 or not? No, don't sweat the right answer. Sweat the logic. Where'd you start from? What'd you do? How'd you do the math? Does it make sense? Okay? All right, so, yeah, so when you're going through that process, and then, because I want to get to one more slide and then we'll wrap up. When you're asking that question, when they ask you the question, if you have any doubt up front, ask them a clarifying question. So I get asked how many, you know, manhole covers there are in Washington. I could say, okay, you know, how many manhole covers are there in Washington? So I would say, okay, you're talking Washington, D.C. or the state of Washington? Right, that's a fair clarifying question. Oh, we're talking, you know, actually Seattle and Washington. Okay, Seattle and Washington, okay. All right, then you could jump from there, because you don't want to start saying these things that are not even close. The other thing about asking a clarifying question is it shows that that's what you're going to do when you get asked a really ambiguous question. Right? You're not going to ask for the answer, but just give me some bounds or constraints that we're working within. You could say, is it okay if I, you know, don't include the little water cover holes and we just talk about manholes that a man can actually fit down? Yes. All right, once again, you're helping them show that you can do what you're asking to do. At the end, you can ask, you know, do they want you to optimize it? And then you could, you know, take another cut at it with maybe one more filter on it.
Just, it's, because I had children, it's almost like when they take their test, and the teacher will always say, okay, show your work.
Yes.
They would think that, to show that they're not copying, but I would always explain to them, they will maybe give you half a point if you got there. They just want to see how you think.
Exactly.
They just want to see, you know, that
Exactly.
process.
So her example is kids, teacher says, show your work. As she said, no cheating. But I think more importantly, it's because they can say, give you partial credit, or they can say, hey, this was correct, and this is where you made a mistake, as opposed to the answer is 42. All right.
Can you clarify for me the optimization piece? I don't know.
Yeah. So going back to the manhole cover example, so an optimization, they may say, okay, you excluded all the little small ones. Can you include the little small ones, right? Or I could say, if you want me to optimize that, I could, you know, take a, you know, those that are for sewer, storm drainage versus utilities, right? That would be an optimization, right? It's just doing more refining. Yes, sir.
So I guess I'm not clear either. So when you say optimization, like what is the goal they're trying to do by optimizing?
No, sorry. So this really just shows that you can take it a step further, right? That's really the point, right? Because once again, when you're dealing with ambiguity, they're going to want to know, okay, you've got to a certain point, can you go further, right? All right. Okay. Couple of quick things. Don't let these very simple questions ask you, right? We're talking behavioral questions and estimation questions. I got asked, why do you want to work here? And I didn't have a good answer, which was completely shame on me. So that one stung many years ago, but I've never forgotten that, right? And I always use that in my interviews now. So why do you want to work here? And then what's your greatest weakness? Right, that's a softball question. And the way to answer that is, well, it's X, but here's what I'm doing to compensate for that. And if you just Google how to answer that question, then you're good to go. Yes, sir.
On the middle one there, why do you want to work here? You know, typically you want to talk about their company values and all that, but if the location of the company is ideal for you, is that something that's going to bring up or not?
It's never about you. I hear you guys have great benefits. You're right around the block. You have a gym. You have all-you-can-eat food. No, those are all things about me, right? The reason you want to work there is because you care about the work that they're doing. It's an exciting new technology that you've been wanting to work on that will help them. You believe in their customers, right? Things like that, right? That's what you want to, you know, that they're growing and you want to help them grow in a certain area.
Would it be that I understand your, or I like your culture, your work culture? Is that a you or is that a them?
That's more of a you. A them would be, you know, it's very clear that you guys have a great culture established here, and I want to help, you know, to the extent that I get to work with you to maintain and grow that. Right. So, and there are some gray lines, but, you know, once again, just make sure it's not money, benefits, closeness to the house, whatever it might be, gym. All right, so this is the last slide. Mindset, right? It's two businesses. It's got to be a win for them, and it's got to be a win for you. If it's not a win for either one, part ways friends. I'll tell you the best thing you can do if you decide this job is not for you is to, if you think of somebody else that would be a good person for that, say, hey, listen, you know, I know somebody, hint, hint, who might be a better fit for you. Let me see if they're interested, and I'll put you guys in contact. Now, why is that important? Anybody? Why is that important if you can do that? Right. I got a problem. I'm the interviewing guy. I got a problem. I need somebody to come work for me. I've typically have been 2 months, you know, trying to get this thing filled, and I can't find the great person. And unfortunately, it's not going to work out between Shirley and I, which is all right because I'm already married. No, it's not going to work out between Shirley and I. But if Shirley says, "Oh, hey, let me introduce you to your wife because she'd probably be the best person to be your wife," then I'd say, "Hey, that's great, right?" And I'd really appreciate Shirley. And then, by the way, it's a two-way street. So, okay, Shirley's looking for this. Like, can I help Shirley out? Do I know anybody? Right? And it kind of goes back to the thing about equals and then the relationship. All right? Okay. Behavioral questions we talked about, submission questions we talked about, and then those common questions. And the final thing I'll say is, you know, do your research before you interview at a company. One of the things you may want to look at is who are their competitors. That's always kind of impressive if you know who their competitors are, because it shows that you've gone a couple layers down. And then practice, practice, practice. You know, there's a lot of people in this room. You guys can get on a phone call or Zoom and practice with each other. You can get your wife, a close friend, somebody at church, somebody at a group, whatever it might be, and you just say, listen, all I want to do is I just want you to sit there, smile, and ask me these questions. And you give them the questions to ask, and they don't have to know the answers. It's not about them. It's about you practicing and coming across as authentic and confident. Okay? Any final questions?
How do you deal with age discrimination?
Age discrimination and sex discrimination are unfortunately just super real. I wish I had a short answer for you. I really don't. I think, so there's a couple of concerns when you think about age discrimination, and that is they're not healthy, they don't have the energy, they make too much money, they're going to retire in 2 years, they have old skills, aren't going to want to, you know, can't teach an old dog new tricks. Those are some of the things that are typical concerns about age discrimination. So you need to figure out ways to show them that that doesn't apply to you as much as you can. So when you go back to your SOARs, that's an opportunity to start putting those things to rest. So, oh yeah, I went out and learned a new programming language, you know, last month. It was great. Now I know how to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, it shows you're staying current. It shows you're still learning. It shows you're curious. Right? So, can I get one more question, or are we done? Okay. And then you're next, ma'am.
I got a bit of a question that kind of adds on that one, plus something I'm up against. I have a phone interview this afternoon, and so typically on our resume, we limit it to the last, say, 4 jobs or the X number of years. But the problem is with this phone interview, I've been in the medical field many years ago, and then I got out of the medical field, and then I came back in. I'm looking at a medical company. For the phone interview, if I'm talking to the recruiter, is it okay for me to bring up something that is earlier on the resume?
Yeah. And you don't necessarily have to call it out that's earlier in the resume. You can just say, oh yeah, this is my SOAR. This was a situation, this is what the obstacle was. It's kind of like I was saying, a second ago. You don't have to measure when it was, just here's what you did in the result. Because that's what they want to know, right? They don't really care whether it was last week or 3 years ago.
How do you convince a company that's closed-minded that needs to reevaluate their ethical system and the old traditions from where the old traditions can help them? How do you break through that barrier to help to get a job and help them?
So the question is, how do you help a company think through making a change to the culture and ethical questions? So my answer to that is I would just move on to your next opportunity. Because until they're ready to change, you're wasting your time.
So how do you find companies that are willing to open those things?
Research. Yeah, just research. Top 20 companies to work for in that field. Talk to your peers. Go to industry associations that are there. But man, do not try and do what you're saying. Unless they're hiring you in specifically to do that, which is still risky. But then at least But yeah, to try and walk in and make a change like that. Cultures are hard to change to begin with. And for them to bring somebody from the outside, the antibodies would just be everywhere. Any other questions? So the question is, should I use this format when you're filling out a questionnaire? So you should use this format on your LinkedIn profile, on your resumes, everywhere that the behavioral questions, the SOAR, you mentioned STAR, right? That should be pretty much everywhere you're advertising yourself. Now, it can't be paragraph per because people aren't going to read it on a resume on LinkedIn. But you could say, hey, here's the situation I was in and here's the result. Or here's what I did and here's what the result is. People want to know what the result of your effort was. I don't care if you spent 20, I'll tell you something really quick. I was really young in my career. I was having dinner with some older friends. He was a VP at a very large computer company, and I was bitching about how hard I was working. And he's eating, he's an old Texan guy, great guy. And after a little bit, he goes, Alex, don't confuse effort with results. That shut me up. And I've never forgotten it. And so that would be the thing I would say is you always want to show your results. So what did I do and what was the result? That should be, and if the results should be quantifiable. I was third out of 20 people, $20 million, less than 6 months, under budget. Right? Put something that people know that what you accomplished was actually a really good thing for the company. One final question, and then I'm happy to stand to the side, but I want to let Kathy do her thing. Okay, 2 final questions. Ladies first.
Where would you say on a LinkedIn profile would you be putting this, or are you saying?
Every bullet, right? So LinkedIn, you have, here's the name of the company, my role, and the dates, and then you have bullets, as many bullets as possible. What I did, the result. What I did, the result. The result by what I did. Yes, where's my friend? Oh, I think she just left. So, there was a standard set of questions that they would ask, and you can insert the SOARs as the answers. But you don't have to wait for them to ask you a behavioral question. You want to use your SOARs, because even if they ask bad questions, or it's not clear or whatever, then you can use your SOAR and then ask them afterwards, did I answer your question? But use your SOARs to your advantage. Okay, and it's not just in interviews. If you go to a meetup, you're going to go to the product management meetup. What have you done? Oh, here's what I've done. He's a sore. Here's what I've done. He's a sore. All right.